Welcome to the 10th week of this year's In Times Like These recap. Now, let's get into this, starting with Isabel Torres, who asks Isidore how Max is doing and asks Isidore about how he's doing. After Isidore explains that he's only trying to stay strong for his family, he also informs Isabel how it's painful to see Max in the hospital and that he felt so much pain. Isabel tells Isidore how he understands, informing him about Ulisa's struggles, telling him that she hopes Max pulls through. Jeremiah Dorval comes back home from the hospital, but he expresses to his family about his concerns about whether Devante Torres will strike again. When Jeremiah tells his family that he hates feeling like a sitting duck since he can't prove that Devante terrorized them, Raymond and Shelley remind him that when Devante goes to prison, he won't be a threat. Jeremiah reminds them how Devante would still be roaming free, allowing him to attack the family once again. This causes Shelley to ask if Jeremiah plans to get Devante to admit to what he did. Since Devante won't admit to taking Elvira's life, Jeremiah understands that Devante won't confess to what he's done to them, but feels like he can make Devante suffer the consequences. Neither Raymond or Shelley like what Jeremiah is saying, asking Jeremiah what he plans to do. Terry Burke is approached by Devante at Theodosius' palace, joining her as she eats her meal. She informs him about her custody battle against Finnegan, and Devante tells her how his marriage to Isabel seems to be coming to an end. He goes on to say how the end of his marriage is his fault, since he cheated on Isabel with Elvira, who was a teenager. Since he's being charged with taking Elvira's life, Terry tells Devante to be strong and takes a selfie with him to prove to the world that she's behind him. Isidore sees the picture Terry sent him, pleased that it would help end Isabel's marriage to Devante. In Heidi Russo's office, Zeke Franklin asks Heidi why he's not at the police station. Heidi tells Zeke that she has brought him to her office to give him the option to either face prison time or tell him where he gets his substances from. Reluctantly, Zeke decides to be a snitch for the police, informing that Adaku supplies the product and that Devante Torres is associated with Adaku Danjuma. Vanessa Dorval approaches Yvette Mitchell at the high school, asking Yvette how she's doing. Yvette tells Vanessa that she's fine, thanking her for checking in on her. Vanessa wonders if that's true, wondering how she felt when she heard about Max Russo. All that Yvette tells Vanessa is that she feels bad for him, unsure of how else she should feel. The response that Vanessa gives is that Yvette can come to her for support when she continues to press charges against Max. Immediately, Yvette tells Vanessa that she dropped the charges against Max. Shocked, Vanessa asks Yvette what would make her drop the charges against Max. All Yvette tells Vanessa is that she only wants to move on with her life. This answer isn't good enough for Vanessa, but once Yvette questions if Max hasn't already suffered enough, Vanessa thinks back to the time when Ulisa and even Max claimed that he was innocent. As soon as Vanessa realizes the truth, she admits that Max must have suffered enough since Yvette caused him to go through so much because she lied about what Max did. When Yvette attempts to walk away, Vanessa stops her, explaining to Yvette the damage that she caused over a lie. Suddenly, JJ appears to have heard everything. Nichelle Torres approaches her younger sister Ulisa, expressing to Ulisa that she doesn't trust Pacho at all. Knowing that Pacho is working to obtain Theodosius's palace, Ulisa changes the subject and asks her sister if she noticed that Zeke wasn't at school. Trying to appear like she doesn't care, Nichelle wonders why that should concern her. Ulisa makes the connection between Zeke being a dealer and Max overdosing. She goes on to ask Nichelle if she would feel nothing if Zeke goes away to prison for a long time. The answer that Nichelle gives is that she doesn't care what happens to her ex. especially after he broke her heart. Yulisa reminds her older sister how she had strong feelings for Zeke. Annoyed, Nichelle reminds her younger sister that she was against her being with Zeke in the first place. Even though Yulisa admits how true that is, she tells Nichelle how concerned she is for her in case Zeke goes to prison. Nichelle tells her younger sister not to be concerned about her, claiming that she'd be fine. When Quinlan Franklin asks her younger brother if he's ready to make a statement and attempt to make a deal with the police, he informs Quinlan that he already agreed to be a snitch for Heidi Russo. In disbelief, Quinlan can't believe that Heidi's got Zeke, who is a minor, being a snitch. Zeke promises to make it out alive, but Quinlan tells her brother that this is a promise he can't keep. Heidi sits by Max's side, pleading with him to open his eyes. Suddenly, Owen enters the room, telling Heidi how Yvette dropped the charges against Max, believing that she threatened the Mitchells to make Yvette do so. Heidi explains how she had no idea, stating that Yvette clearly felt guilty over her lies and dropped the charges. When Owen expresses how he doesn't believe it, Heidi replies that she doesn't care, demanding that he leave. Once Owen reminds Heidi that threatening people is against the law, she warns Owen not to threaten her. As soon as she says those words, Gianni enters, and once he figures out what's going on, he tells Owen to leave. After Owen leaves, Gianni asks his wife what that was all about. Heidi informs Gianni that Yvette dropped the charges against Max, shocking Gianni. Suddenly, they notice that Max has opened his eyes. At her work desk, Quinlan calls Pacho to inform him that Zeke has been selling substances and ended up being a snitch against Adaku and Devante after selling substances to Max. This causes Pacho to ask her what she wants him to do about it. Quinlan asks Pacho if he can try to get into the fold of the crime underworld. Baffled by this request, Pacho tells Quinlan that he would only be risking his life, reminding her how Zeke knew the risks. She reminds Pacho that her brother is all that she has. Pacho tells Quinlan that she needs to just trust that Zeke won't make the wrong move and that he'll be fine, telling Quinlan that his focus is to get Theodosius's palace and nothing more, ending the call. Once the call is over, Jeremiah approaches Quinlan, telling her that he needs to tell the world how dangerous Devante Torres is and the damage that Devante caused in his life. Isidore approaches Isabel, showing her the photo of Terry and Devante. The photo proves to her that Devante is ready to move on, upset at the time she wasted and the sacrifices she made to stay married. When he asks Isabel about her sacrifices, she doesn't tell him that she terminated her pregnancy with the child they would have shared together. So she avoids the question, telling him that she'll divorce Devante after he's convicted. After she expresses her plan to pass Theodosius' palace on to her daughters, she walks off as Isidore feels guilt, knowing that he's attempting to gain ownership of the hotel. Ben Russo arrives at the hospital after Max woke up. Ben wonders if his younger brother doesn't want to see him. Max answers that he doesn't want to see anyone after he tried to take his life, feeling like he'd be seen as a quitter and a failure. His family tries to assure him how that's not how the family will see him as, assuring him that the family was hoping that he would pull through and that the family wants to see him get better. Most of all, they try to assure Max that he's not alone. They proceed to inform Max that Yvette dropped the charges, but he feels like it doesn't change much since Yvette hadn't cleared his name. After hearing Vanessa scold Yvette for lying, JJ asks Yvette if it's true. When Yvette refuses to answer, Vanessa informs her younger brother that Yvette dropped the charges against Max. Frustrated, JJ asks Yvette what she has to say for herself, playing them like fools and driving Max to take his own life. In anger, he reveals to Yvette that he's the one who found Max. Horrified, Yvette tells JJ how sorry she is. JJ tells Yvette to save it. Yvette tells JJ she didn't want to hurt anyone, but he doesn't buy it. He goes on to express his disbelief that Yvette pretended to be his friend. Once Yvette tries to assure JJ that she is his friend, he reminds Yvette that people don't convince their friends to believe their lies. Yvette expresses that she doesn't want to lose their friendship. Vanessa asks Yvette if she'll clear Max's name. Once Yvette answers that she can't clear Max's name, JJ wonders why. Vanessa answers that if Yvette clears Max's name, then that means she'd be admitting that she lied to the police, which is a crime. JJ tells Yvette she's worse than he initially believed. When he walks off, Vanessa follows, leaving Yvette in tears. Pacho approaches Nichelle, asking her older brother what he wants. He tells Nichelle how he would like to know a bit more about Zeke. Since Pacho heard about what happened with Zeke after what Quinlan told him, he asks his younger sister if she was aware of Zeke's illegal activities. Angered, Nichelle tells Pacho how he has no right to question her like that when he walked out of their lives. Pacho tells Nichelle that he didn't walk out, but kept in touch. Nichelle reminds Pacho how he only kept in touch through their mother only. Pacho tells Nichelle not to ignore the question, pointing out how he heard about Max's overdose, feeling like Zeke was probably the one who sold substances to Max, wondering if she knew that Zeke was a dealer or not. Devante walks in, wondering why Pacho is hounding his sister. Pacho tells his father how he's only asking out of concern after hearing about Max's overdose. Devante assures Pacho that Nichelle would have never stayed with Zeke if she found out about his illegal activities, assuring Pacho that he has a smart sister, but commends him for looking out for her. Nichelle walks off, telling them how she can look out for herself. When Udell and Wanda Mitchell make dinner plans, he asks Wanda if she's comfortable leaving Yvette on her own. Since Yvette is still on punishment, Wanda feels like they should be able to enjoy the rest of their night without worrying about their daughter. To their surprise, Heidi shows up, telling the couple how she's heard that Yvette dropped the charges against her son, wondering if their daughter will clear Max's name. All they reply with is that Max can focus on recovering, but Heidi reminds them that Max wouldn't be in the hospital in the first place if it weren't for them. As soon as Heidi asks them how they plan to see Yvette punished, Udell and Wanda tell Heidi that she doesn't need to worry about their child since Max is no longer facing charges. Heidi expresses how she almost lost her son due to Yvette's actions and tells Wanda that if she were in her shoes, she'd be going after blood as well, telling them how she's going after blood. Udell tells Heidi to leave, which she does. Once she's gone, Wanda wonders if they should make Yvette confess to her lies to try and get a deal. Udell reminds Wanda how Heidi was certain that she wouldn't agree to a deal, telling his wife that there's another option. Quinlan appears at Ben's office, who scolds her for showing her face after what her brother did to his. She tells Ben how that's why she came, to apologize. Ben tells Quinlan how Zeke should be the one apologizing, but it doesn't erase the fact that Zeke gave Max substances. He goes on to ask if Zeke is paying for what he did. Quinlan answers that he is, since Zeke is forced to be a snitch against Devante and Adaku, all due to his mother. Even though she understands the chaos Zeke's actions caused, Quinlan asks Ben if he can get Heidi to change her mind about making Zeke her snitch. Ben is baffled, asking Quinlan why she thinks he would ever agree to something like that, reminding her that the last time he helped Zeke, Max ended up paying the price, vowing not to make that mistake again. Shelley sees that Vanessa is upset, asking her daughter what's wrong. Vanessa tells Shelley how Max was innocent all along and that her unbelief almost cost Max his life, informing her that Yvette dropped the charges, which confirmed to Vanessa that Yvette lied. She goes on to say how she feels like an idiot and deserves it. Even though Shelley tries to make sure that Vanessa doesn't feel that way, Vanessa reminds Shelley that she warned her to not be so hasty to see Max as guilty, but she wouldn't listen, adding that Max ended up overdosing. Shelley tries to assure Vanessa that what happened to Max wasn't her fault. As for Vanessa, she's unsure since Max clearly needed people in his corner while he was suffering. But Vanessa notices that she made the suffering worse. She goes on to tell her mother how she feels like Max never really got over her, feeling like it must have broken his heart that she saw him as a monster. Shelley tells Vanessa that what matters now is that she knows the truth. Despite that, Vanessa feels like she didn't represent Christ correctly in Max's eyes, but Shelley encourages her daughter to remain in prayer and sincerely apologize to Max the next time she sees him. Once Vanessa states how she wonders if Max will agree to see her, Jeremiah approaches them. Shelley asks her husband where he went after work. Jeremiah tells Shelley how that's what he wanted to tell her and the family, explaining that he went to speak with Quinlan to see if she could agree to interview him about what Devante has done to their family.
Welcome to the 11th week of this year's In Times Like These recap. Now, let's get into this. Starting with our favorite dealer, Zeke Franklin, who is approached by his ex, Nichelle Torres, who asks him how he's not been arrested, asking him if he sold substances to Max Russo. Zeke tells Nichelle how it seems like she already knows the answer, wondering what she expects from him. Nichelle asks Zeke if he's regretted what he's done since Max overdosed. He replies that he's not some monster who wants to see people lose their lives. But Nichelle reminds Zeke how dealing could cost people their lives. After he asks Nichelle what she wants from him, she questions if dealing is something he truly sees in his future. Zeke answers that it doesn't matter what he thinks, since she wants no part in his future, then walks away. At the hospital, Heidi and Johnny Russo inform their son Max how they're sending him to rehab, which Max is not happy about at all. Max expresses that he doesn't have an issue with substances, but since he took Trank, which is highly addictive, they refuse to take any chances. At J. Dorval HVAC Services, Shelley Dorval tells her husband Jeremiah how quiet Devante seemed after Jeremiah's interview with Quinlan, insinuating that Devante terrorized them. Devante walks into their business, ranting about Jeremiah's interview, asking Jeremiah why he would assume that he wouldn't retaliate. Unbothered by Devante's frustration, Jeremiah answers that he's more prepared if Devante decides to retaliate. Shelley demands that Devante leave. After Devante is gone, Shelley pleads with Jeremiah not to go to war with Devante. Jeremiah assures his wife that this is a war that God will help them win. At Russo Jewelers, in Isidore Russo's office, Alan tells his father how he plans to wreck Theodosius's palace by throwing a wild spring break party on the hotel's beachfront. Isidore is ecstatic at the idea, knowing that it will influence the hotel guests to flee. Suddenly, Isidore gets a call from Udell Mitchell. Udell tells Isidore that he has an offer which he can't refuse. Isidore meets with Udell at Mitchell Law, asking Udell what he has to do in order to get his and Alan's Russo Jewelers shares back. Udell tells Isidore how he needs to get Heidi to back off. Udell goes on to say that if Isidore doesn't accept his request, then he and Wanda can reveal to the Russos that they are shareholders of Russo Jewelers. Adaku Danjuma meets Devante at Theodosius's palace, where he asks her if she's trying to sabotage him in order to obtain the hotel, after allowing Quinlan Franklin to interview Jeremiah. Adaku plays innocent, telling Devante that his issue is with Quinlan and Jeremiah, advising him that he needs to know the difference between his friends and his enemies. As she walks off, Devante tells himself how he knows who his enemies are, promising to make them face his wrath. Meeting Ronnie at the street corner, Zeke claims that he's been sick, but Ronnie questions if Zeke has been ignoring him after news broke out of Max's overdose. Ronnie goes on to ask Zach how many substances Max bought off of him. When Zach answers that Max bought several, Ronnie gets angry, asking Zach what he was thinking. Zeke answers that he didn't expect Max to overdose. This is when Ronnie reveals that the substances are laced with something, admitting that they're laced with tranq, shocking Zeke. Upon hearing about the fact that they're selling substances laced with tranq, Zeke is uneasy about it, as Ronnie tells him to get over it and keep making money. Max hears the door open, but without seeing who walked in, he tells the person that he's trying to go to sleep. Vanessa asks if she can have a word before he does so. She goes on to ask Max how he's been. Max answers, then apologizes for making her and JJ find him, and he expresses how surprised he is that she showed up and isn't scolding him for taking substances and trying to take his life. She tells Max how she won't scold him, especially when she realizes that he was struggling and felt alone, informing him that she knows that Yvette lied about Max, forcing himself on her, apologizing for not believing him. Max tells Vanessa that saying sorry won't erase the past, his pain, and that he's going away. When Vanessa asks him where he's going, he tells Vanessa that he'll be going to rehab. When Vanessa questions if he has an issue with substances, Max explains that he's going since his parents don't want him to end up like his older brother. Vanessa apologizes once again, but Max, heartbroken, tells Vanessa to leave. As they're in separate rooms, Max sobs as Vanessa weeps. Heidi walks into the Russo estate with Clarice. As soon as Gianni asks his wife what she's doing at the estate, Clarice informs them how she invited Heidi to move back in. Gianni is displeased to hear the news, and Heidi informs him that she is just as surprised as he is. He goes on to ask if Zeke has been charged for selling substances to Max. Heidi informs her husband that Zeke is paying for what he's done to their son. Frustrated, Gianni asks Heidi what that's supposed to mean. Since she can't tell him that Zeke is an informant, Heidi asks Gianni to trust her. When he walks away, Isidore approaches Heidi, telling her how he'd like to help her get back at the Mitchells. Finnegan arrives at the Burke house just as Terry is about to head to work, asking her about her relationship with Devante, worrying how it could affect their son Keeve, since she can't tell him that she's only pretending to be friends with Devante in order to get intel for Devante. She tells Finnegan how she'll stand by Devante's side since he hasn't been convicted of taking Elvira Russo's life yet. When Finnegan is in his office, he calls his lover and lawyer, Harley Drake, to inform that they're able to use something against Terry in court. Quinlan hears a knock at the door and is troubled to find that she answered it for Devante. He goes on to intimidate her as she fights to make a brave face. Devante pretty much warns Quinlan that going after him would be a huge mistake since he's a powerful and dangerous man, leaving Quinlan shaken up. Keeve catches up with JJ at the high school, telling his friend how he hasn't told him much about how he found Max. JJ answers he doesn't want to talk about it, especially when that didn't have to happen, when Yvette lied about him and other people kept giving Max a hard time. As soon as Keeve claims that he hopes Max gets the help he needs when he goes to rehab, JJ asks him how he knows about that. Before Keeve has the chance to answer, Yvette approaches them. JJ asks Keeve to let him speak with Yvette alone. As soon as Keeve leaves, JJ tells Yvette that he hopes that she's willing to tell the truth about Max. Instead, Yvette tells JJ how she wants him to know that she wasn't trying to take advantage of his kindness. Annoyed, he tells Yvette how that's exactly what she did, wondering if his mental illness made him an easy target. Yvette denies this, but JJ tells Yvette that he can't be friends with someone he can't trust, walking off from her. In the bathroom, JJ flashes back to Max's overdose and Yvette's lies, then decides to get rid of his medicine, since things haven't gotten better but worse. Lorenzo and Clarice are outside of Max's hospital room as she expresses how much it hurts to see their grandson in pain. Suddenly, Vivian appears and comes face to face with Clarice, who has no idea that she's come face to face with her husband's illegitimate daughter. Lorenzo expresses his gratitude for Vivian showing her support. Then Clarice tells Vivian how familiar she seems. Since the two of them haven't met each other before, Vivian tells Clarice that she doesn't know how that's possible, even though she does. Unbeknownst to Lorenzo, there's tension between the two women, and Vivian walks off, calling Clarice a bougie hoe under her breath. At the high school, Yulisa points out to Vanessa how she never explained to her what the visit with Max was like. Vanessa tells her best friend how she was too ashamed to speak about it. Vanessa informs her friend that Max was cold towards her, expressing how she kind of understands how Max felt when she was cold towards him. As soon as Yulisa tries to assure Vanessa that it was the hurt talking, Vanessa tells Yulisa how the Bible talks about what someone says out of the mouth comes from the heart. Yulisa reminds Vanessa that she hoped that Vanessa wouldn't beat herself up over it. Vanessa tells her best friend that she can't help herself, thinking about what could have happened if she would have only believed Max and stood by his side. Yulisa tells Vanessa that she's not doing herself any favors by wondering about the what-ifs, telling Vanessa that God can use Max being in rehab for good. She goes on to tell Vanessa that she'll gift Max with a Bible that he can read during his time there, and that she'll pray he reads and gives his life to Christ. After Heidi asks Isidore how he plans to help her get revenge on the Mitchells, he tells her that she needs to back off, which confuses her. Isidore explains that since the Mitchells are ready for a fight, then they need to go after them when they least expect it. After Heidi tells Isidore how she sees his point, she asks her brother-in-law how they'll get Yvette to confess. Isidore begins to tell Heidi how they need to get someone close enough to the Mitchells to get a confession out of Yvette, wondering if she has anyone in mind. She answers that she does. Heidi makes a call to Owen Grant, and when he answers, she tells the assistant district attorney that he can inform the Mitchells that she won't be pursuing charges against Yvette Mitchell for her lies. Owen begins to ask why she can't tell them herself, disgusted by the fact that she would pursue charges against Yvette. The answer that Heidi gives is that they could use an answer from a friend. Pacho tells Devante how they really need to consider how to handle spring break, which Devante tells his son not to worry about. As soon as Pacho gets a call, he tells Devante that he'll have to take it. Once Pacho answers Quinlan's call, she tells him how Devante is unhinged. She informs Pacho about Devante's threats against her and that they need to change their plan by exposing Adaku as a crime boss and exposing Devante's association with her. As soon as Quinlan makes this suggestion, Pacho hears something break. Pacho meets with his father, who hears about an unexpected party at the beachfront. As they rush over to the beach, they see Alan partying along the spring breakers. Welcome to the 12th week of this year's In Times Like These recap. Now, let's get into this. Owen Grant surprises Wanda and Udell Mitchell at their estate, informing them that Heidi won't be seeking legal action against Yvette. Yet, Owen wonders if Heidi threatened them to make Yvette change her mind. Wanda requests that she speak with Owen alone, attempting to convince him that Heidi didn't threaten them since she doesn't want to expose that Yvette lied about Max Russo forcing himself on her. Once Owen leaves, Udell tells his wife that they'll have to prepare to hand Isidore and Alan Russo their Russo Jewelers shares back. Zeke Franklin arrives at Heidi Russo's office, meeting Finnegan Burke, informing them that Adaku is selling portions of Trank into her product and that his superior, Ronnie Adams, knew about it all along. When Heidi suggests that Ronnie get out of the way so that Zeke takes his place, Zeke questions what she plans to do to him. Heidi tells Zeke not to worry about that. Later on, Ronnie is chased down and caught by police for the possession and sale of illegal substances. Quinlan Franklin surprises the Dorval family, informing them that Devante Torres threatened her, warning them that they could be in more danger. When she leaves, Raymond and Shelley warn Jeremiah not to push Devante to cause any more damage. As for Jeremiah, he believes that Devante's wrath will lead to his downfall. At the beachfront outside of Theodosia's palace, Pacho and his father Devante command Alan Russo to stop the party and leave the hotel. Alan claims that he didn't set the whole thing up, but before he proceeds to continue partying, Devante gets physical with Alan, warning him that he's messing with the wrong people. Pacho tells his father to release Alan, but Alan tries to tick Devante off even more. Suddenly, they hear a scream and notice that someone fatally overdosed on the beachfront. At the high school, Yulisa Torres asks JJ Dorval how he's doing after discovering that Yvette lied. JJ claims that he's okay, but Yulisa is unsure if that's the truth. He tells Yulisa that he doesn't need her or anyone else to check up on him. He goes on to state how she needs to check up on her father, fearing that Devante will try to wipe out his entire family. When JJ vows to protect his family from Devante, he walks off, worrying Yulisa. Zeke approaches his ex, Nichelle Torres, telling her that he wants to check up on her after hearing about what occurred at Theodosius's palace the other day. Nichelle tells her ex how she's not surprised that he wants to discuss the overdose, since it's right up his alley. She tells Zeke that a lot of things have happened in the hotel all throughout her life, expressing how she and her family shouldn't have to be blamed. In response, Zeke asks Nichelle if she's sure of that. Nichelle believes that Devante had everything under control in the past until Alan Russo brought a ton of troublemakers into the hotel. He states that he wishes Nichelle trusted him as much as she trusted her father. She responds that her father never let her down like Zeke has. Zeke answers that she might find that her father's human and not the superhuman she's always believed him to be, then walks off. At Theodosius's palace, Devante tries to reach Adaku, but she doesn't answer. Afterward, Devante leaves a message asking how someone lost his life after using her product. Once he leaves the message, Pacho enters the room. Pacho reminds his father that since someone lost their lives on the hotel, guests have been leaving quickly and that they need to make an announcement quick if they don't want the hotel to linger in bad publicity. Annoyed, Devante tells his son that he's not the head of the hotel, nor is he the head of the family. Pacho claims that he's not trying to take his father's place, but that he's trying to help him, which is why he came back home. Devante tells his son how he appreciates his help, but that he doesn't appreciate being blamed for what happened, especially when he claims that it was Alan's fault. Upon hearing Alan's name, Pacho tells Devante that blaming Alan is exactly what they'll tell the public. After Adaku ignores Devante's call, Quinlan enters. Adaku, assuming that Quinlan is trying to get a statement out of Devante, tells the reporter how she doubts that Devante will make a comment. She tells Adaku that if she got anywhere near Devante again, then he would attempt to strangle her. When Quinlan explains how Devante threatened her, Adaku offers Quinlan protection, which Quinlan reluctantly agrees to. After speaking with Adaku, Quinlan calls Pacho to tell him how they need to turn Adaku and Devante against one another in order to take them both down. Heidi enters Owen Grant's office to confirm that he told the Mitchells that she wouldn't pursue legal action against Yvette. He tells Heidi that he has, wondering if that was part of the agreement to get Yvette to drop the charges against Max. She denies this, telling him that the truth is that Yvette lied, and if she confesses, then he'll have to charge her. But since she notices how close he's grown to the Mitchells, he wonders if he would be able to pursue charges against Yvette if she admits to lying. Owen responds by telling Heidi to leave. Isabel Torres arrives at Theodosius's palace, requesting that Nichelle stay with her, fearing that her daughter is unsafe with Devante. As for Devante, he disagrees. Then Nichelle arrives, unwilling to leave her father. Defeated, Isabel tells her daughter that if Nichelle ever feels unsafe, then she'll come back to get her. Not long after Isabel leaves, Devante meets with Adaku, telling her that they need to have a serious conversation. Essidor and Alan arrive at Mitchell Law to get their Russo Jewelers shares back from Udell. Alan is confused as to what caused Udell to give the shares back. Since Essidor doesn't want to let his son know what he's truly up to, he suggests that Alan stop asking questions. When they get back to the family estate, Alan still has questions which Essidor is unwilling to answer. Suddenly, Alan notices that Pacho is on the news, speaking about the fatal overdose which occurred at Theodosius's palace. To their surprise, Pacho blames Alan for the tragedy. Yulisa calls Vanessa, wondering if JJ is around, telling her best friend that JJ is worrying her. Concerned, Vanessa asks Yulisa why she's worried about JJ, explaining what JJ told her when they last spoke. Disheartened, Vanessa thought that JJ understood that he can't freak out and to leave what he can't control into God's hands. Yulisa goes on to explain how JJ expressed that he'd protect his family from Devante himself. This confuses Vanessa, wondering exactly how JJ would even be able to protect them to begin with. Yulisa is unsure, but goes on to state how JJ had an agitated demeanor, wondering if he's still taking his meds. Vanessa doesn't want to believe it, but since JJ ran away before he received his schizophrenic diagnosis, Yulisa tells her friend that it's better to be safe than sorry, since JJ could become unpredictable if he gets off of his meds. Vanessa approaches her parents, informing her of what Yulisa said, expressing how JJ might be struggling. Jeremiah and Shelley assure Vanessa that they'll handle it, but Vanessa wonders if JJ might have a point, questioning if Devante will try to wipe their entire family out. Jeremiah and Shelley assure Vanessa that God will protect them and that as her parents, they won't let anything happen to her or JJ. When Vanessa walks away, Jeremiah expresses his aggravation, telling Shelley how this is the last thing he wanted his kids to go through. He goes on to share that he wants to pursue legal action against Devante. Upon hearing Pacho speak against Alan Russo, Quinlan calls Pacho to scold him, reminding him that they need to turn Devante and Adaku against each other. She goes on to state that it seemed like Pacho missed out on the perfect opportunity to do so when he blamed Alan for the fatal overdose. Pacho tells the reporter that the police department knows that Adaku is a Danjuma, stating that they'll have to trace the overdose back to her. Adaku tells Devante that she's been busy, which is an answer that he doesn't accept. He begins to ask Adaku why someone overdosed on the beachfront. She reveals to him that she's added tranq into the substances, which Devante expresses anger over, telling her that if she wants to do that, then it has to be away from his property. She tells Devante that he doesn't get to decide what she puts in her substances, but since she's selling it on his property. Adaku responds by telling Devante that he's getting full of himself, but Devante disagrees and shifts that on Adaku, telling her how she's getting sloppy and refuses to fall victim to it. This causes Adaku to state that she's not sloppy, scolding him for being reckless for threatening Quinlan, informing him that she had to offer the reporter protection. Even though Devante claims that he wanted to spook Quinlan, Adaku expresses that she doesn't want to take the chance, also warning him not to go after Zeke. This causes Devante to question why. Then she answers that Zeke has raised in a position that she needs him to take over, since the person in his previous position failed her. Zeke enters Finnegan's office, angry that he spoke on a press conference informing the public that there's a tranq issue. Because of the press conference, Zeke tells the police commissioner that he fears that his life is in danger. Even though Finnegan assures Zeke that he'd be protected, Zeke doesn't trust him at all. Suddenly, an officer walks in to inform Finnegan that Ronnie's life was taken in police custody, which troubles Zeke. Welcome to the 13th week of this year's In Times Like These recap. Now, let's get into this. Starting with Alan Russo, who didn't expect his plan to throw a wild party at Theodosius's palace to backfire. Vivian Jones walks in, suggesting that Alan show the town that he's sorrowful by creating a campaign against the use of illegal substances, which Isidore agrees with. As Alan sorrowfully walks out, Isidore tells Vivian that she has a bright future ahead of her, which she appreciates. Isidore is still unaware that Vivian is his younger half-sister, as she tells herself that she'll be after her father's position in the family business. Harley Drake approaches her client, Devante Torres, scolding him for blaming Alan for the tragedy that happened on his hotel. Devante reminds Harley that he could have done much worse to Alan, reminding her of the beating Alan received a couple of months prior, since he orchestrated the beating. To their surprise, Udell Mitchell shows up, handing Devante legal papers from Jeremiah Dorval, suing Devante and filing a restraining order against him. Quinlan Franklin enters Heidi Russo's office, explaining how spooked Zeke seems after hearing that Ronnie's life was taken from him in custody. Heidi isn't bothered, causing Quinlan to question if Heidi wants Adaku to go down or if she wants Zeke to go down in the process. Heidi answers that she does want Adaku to go down since it was her product that Zeke sold to Max, but Quinlan points out that Heidi wouldn't mind if Zeke were to lose his life in the process. Despite how much Quinlan attempts to make Heidi feel bad, she informs Quinlan that she won't. adding that she can't convince Ben to change her mind. Heidi goes on about how Gianni won't be able to change her mind either since she's back in the estate and might just be closer to stopping him from divorcing her. Quinlan walks off as Heidi smirks. As Zeke Franklin walks around the high school, Nichelle Torres asks him why it seems like he thinks someone is after him. Zeke tries to brush it off, but when Nichelle mentions that she'd never seen him like that before, Zeke asks his ex why she's sending him mixed signals. Nichelle denies it, but Zeke points out that she claims to be over him, but approaches him asking what he's struggling with. Annoyed, she asks him if he's okay because of the press conference Finnegan made about the town having a trank issue, wondering if he's afraid that he'll get caught. Zeke expresses how he's not afraid of that, but Nichelle points out that if she were in his position, then she would be losing her mind. He replies that she's not in his position. Before he walks off, he tells his ex that she's asking way too many questions, going on about how he still cares about her too much to drag her into his mess. As he walks off, Nichelle feels conflicted. Pacho Torres makes a call to his mother, Isabel, warning her about getting close to the Russos, fearing that they could be using her and Ulisa to get a hold of Theodosius's palace. Then Isidore walks in. Isabel begins to ask Isidore if he's trying to sabotage Theodosius's palace in order to take it away, which Isidore denies. This causes Isabel to ask if Isidore will get Alan to stop trying to tear Theodosius's palace down. Once she makes this request, Alan enters the room, telling Isabel how he won't step down. Alan tears into Isabel, reminding her that Devante took Elvira's life and that she should be grateful that his family has treated her with kindness. Angered, Isidore tells Alan to stop. Then Isabel walks off as Alan tells her to keep on walking and that he hopes Theodosius' palace burns to the ground. Just as Isidore scolds his son, Alan begins to remind his father that he needs Theodosius' palace to make up for his lost inheritance, telling Isidore how he can't have Isabel get in the way of their plan to take Theodosius' palace and take it for their own. When Zeke arrives at Quinlan's apartment, she suggests that her younger brother change the deal and decide to go to prison to stay alive. Zeke isn't willing to do it, especially since Heidi won't use her resources to ensure his protection, telling his older sister that he's better off being a snitch for the police and try to keep himself alive as he gives them information. She reminds Zeke that he's going against powerful people, reminding him that he's only an untrained teenager. He points out that he's working with trained professionals, adamant that he won't be going to prison where he has nowhere to run. At J. Dorval HVAC Services, Shelley Dorval tells her husband Jeremiah that she still doesn't understand why he pursued legal action against Devante. As soon as Jeremiah explains to his wife that he did so to protect their family, Devante walks in. Devante goes on to ask Jeremiah if he has any idea what he's doing. Jeremiah states that he does, which is protecting his family. Devante tells Jeremiah if this is his way of protecting his family, then he's sadly mistaken. Hearing this statement angers Jeremiah, telling Devante that he won't change his mind, blurting out that he won't intimidate him like he did with Quinlan. Just as Devante tries to tell Jeremiah that he doesn't know what he's talking about, Jeremiah tells Devante to save it, telling him how he doesn't want to see him until they meet in court. Devante tries to explain that this legal action could make him look bad in court. As soon as Jeremiah tells Devante that he shouldn't have taken Elvira's life, Devante leaves. Once Devante's gone, Shelley scolds Jeremiah for his temper, telling him that he might have placed Quinlan in danger. Jeremiah tells Shelley that if Devante knows what's good for him, then he'd leave Quinlan alone. At the high school, Ulisa Torres checks up on JJ Dorval, but he wonders when she last spoke with her father. She assures him that she hasn't been in contact. Then JJ shares his theory that her father will use her and Nichelle to destroy his family. Ulisa assures JJ that she would never help her father harm his family, especially after she put her faith and trust in Jesus alone. Still, JJ feels like Devante could trick her, which is when Nichelle approaches them, asking JJ if he's off his medication. JJ snaps at Nichelle, telling her not to make him seem crazy. Since Nichelle and Vanessa are rivals, JJ feels like she would have no problem helping her father destroy his family. Vanessa walks up to the group, then takes JJ away from Yulissa and Nichelle. As Yulissa scolds her older sister for her actions, JJ warns Vanessa to stay away from Nichelle for the sake of their family. Vanessa tells her younger brother that she'll do as she asks, but is concerned about his newfound delusions. Finnegan Burke is in Harley's room, asking her why she seems to be in such a miserable mood. She answers that she's defending a miserable person who finds themselves in trouble. When Finnegan questions if this client is Devante, Harley decides not to answer. Just as Finnegan expresses how disappointed that he can't support his lover defending Devante, Harley reminds him that he can cheer for her while she fights to help him keep custody of his son Kiev. This is when Finnegan states how different his childhood was from his son's, talking about how he was mistreated by both of his parents. He goes on to express that in spite of his dark childhood, he's thankful that Harley is in his life. Heidi enters Udell Mitchell's law office, asking if Owen Grant is still digging to find out why Yvette dropped the charges against Max. Udell tells Heidi how he and Wanda have that handled, telling Heidi that she can walk off. She goes on to ask Owen if he's not concerned. Annoyed, he asks Heidi what he should have to be concerned about. Heidi asks Udell if he noticed how close Owen seemed to have grown towards Wanda. She goes on to state that Udell and Wanda must have had a rough patch in their marriage when he discovered that Wanda knew that Elvira cheated on him with Devante the entire time, on top of the legal stress that Yvette brought on them. This makes Heidi suggest that Owen could have taken advantage of that. Annoyed, Udell asks Heidi what her point is. Heidi tells Udell that Owen could try to be Wanda's hero by figuring out what she supposedly has on them when they all know that the truth is that Yvette lied about what Max did to her, then walks off. In Ben Russo's office, Quinlan tells him that she could really use her help taking down Devante and Adaku, explaining how she and Pacho are attempting to turn the two against one another. Confused, Ben asks why he needs to be involved. She asks him to prove that Adaku is Kalu Danjuma's daughter. Ben questions why she can't do that on her own. Since she can't expose Adaku on the network she owns, she suggests that Ben hand it to a rival network, and Adaku won't be able to deny who she really is when it's all out in the open, believing that it would be the push that Adaku and Devante need to turn against one another. Ben wonders if she's asking him to do this for the greater good or to keep her criminal brother from biting the dust. Quinlan tells Ben that Zeke wouldn't be dealing if Adaku's organization didn't draw him in. As for Ben, he points out that Zeke would have still been dealing because he wanted fast cash. When she asks Ben whether he'll help or not, she receives a text from Gianni, telling Ben to call her when he makes a decision, walking off. Jeremiah notices Shelley holding her pistol as she tells her husband that if Devante is going to unleash his wrath on them, then she'd like to be prepared, especially when she feels like Jeremiah pushed them. JJ enters the living room, asking his parents if something happened as he meets with them. Jeremiah and Shelley ask JJ to be honest about whether he's taking his meds or not. He tells them how Nichelle got to them, telling his parents about his delusion of Devante convincing her to hurt them, and that she's doing so by making JJ seem like he's lost his mind. Jeremiah and Shelley try to assure JJ that they don't think he's lost his mind, but that he needs to take his medication to help him make sense of everything. JJ tells his parents that he sees sense, and that he knows Devante is a demon who wants to wipe out all of them. As they try to assure JJ that Devante won't hurt anyone in the family, JJ believes that Devante could succeed if they're not aware of the tricks that Devante will pull. Shelley shares a Bible verse to calm her son down, reminding JJ that he needs to submit to God and resist the devil, which will cause the devil to flee. Jeremiah informs Shelley that he'll get JJ's prescription filled up again. Once he leaves, Shelley suggests that JJ go to sleep, promising that she'll be by his side until Jeremiah comes back. As JJ sleeps, Shelley hears the doorbell ring, then sees Devante in front of her. Harley asks Finnegan how he feels, then he expresses that he's ready to get it over with, not to lose custody of his son, and that he can't wait to show the world the amazing woman he gained out of this. Afterward, Terry walks into the courtroom with Udell. Udell questions Finnegan about his infidelity, but when Harley cross-examines Finnegan, he blames Terry for being unfaithful to her. When Terry is on the stand, Udell questions her about her home situation. Then Harley asks Terry about her relationship with Devontae Torres. Johnny arrives at Quinlan's apartment where she asks her lover if he's ending things with her. Since Zeke sold illegal substances to Max, almost ending Max's life, Gianni admits that it has made things complicated between them, especially since Zeke hasn't faced charges. As soon as Quinlan informs Gianni that Heidi made Zeke an informant, she doesn't reveal that Zeke is going against the Danjuma organization. But since Gianni hasn't answered her question, she tells Gianni that their relationship is over. He begins to ask how she's going to be protected from Adaku. Quinlan tells Gianni how it's fine, telling Gianni that the more she thinks about it, the more she doesn't think that their relationship would have made it. Gianni tells Quinlan that she might have a point. Before he leaves, she suggests that he work things out with Heidi. When Gianni tells Quinlan that he hopes she finds someone good, she thinks back to her time with Ben on Christmas Eve, then tells herself how she already had. When Owen visits Wanda, she asks him what he needs to speak with her about. He begins to ask Wanda how her headspace is since Devontae will soon be going on trial for taking her best friend's life. She expresses guilt for not coming out earlier about what she knew of his affair with Elvira. Owen attempts to reassure Wanda, reminding her that she was only a teenager. Despite that, Wanda states that she knew better and decided to stay quiet. Since Wanda is speaking up now, Owen expresses how she's making up for it now, promising to be there for her as emotional support, which Wanda appreciates. Yvette walks in, asking Owen what he's doing at her house, feeling like he has no reason to be there since she dropped the charges against Max. Wanda doesn't like her daughter's attitude, but Owen walks off. Once he's gone, Wanda asks Yvette what's wrong with her. Yvette expresses concern that Owen will find out that she lied about Max. Even though Wanda tries to assure her daughter how that won't happen, Yvette feels like if Wanda keeps inviting him over, then he will figure it out. Shelley tells Devontae that Jeremiah isn't home, then he asks her if she knows when he'll be back. This causes her to tell Devontae that he doesn't need to know, reminding him of what Jeremiah told him the other day, but Devontae refuses to leave. She points out that he wouldn't want to have a bad look, threatening to call the police. He goes on to ask Shelley to get Jeremiah to drop the lawsuit and restraining order against him and they can come to peace. Frustrated, Shelley tells Devontae that she won't do such a thing, especially when he is a danger to her family, telling him that he needs to pay for his crimes. Devontae tells Shelley that she's being bold, talking to someone she feels is a danger to her and her family. Once again, Shelley tells Devontae that if he doesn't leave at once, then he'll be in more trouble with the law. As soon as Devontae tells Shelley that she'll be making a big mistake causing trouble for him, Shelley pulls out a gun on him. JJ wakes up, finding out that Shelley is gone, beginning to freak out. Quickly, he runs out to find his mother pointing a gun at Devontae. As soon as Shelley notices JJ outside, Devontae charges at Shelley, forces the gun out of her hand, then shakes and screams at her. JJ hears the voices taunting him, telling JJ that Devontae will take his mother's life. Suddenly, the gun goes off. Devontae drops to the floor and it's shown that JJ pulled the trigger. Welcome to the 14th week of this year's In Times Like These recap. Now, let's get into this. Starting with Dr. Terry Burke, who tries avoiding Harley Drake's question about her connection with Devontae Torres while she's on the stand. Terry is eventually forced to admit that she's been friendly with a man who has been charged with taking Elvira Russo's life. After the questioning is over, Udell is frustrated that Terry didn't say anything about interacting with Devontae. Terry apologizes, but Udell tells her how she only did herself a disservice, warning Terry that she better hope that the judge doesn't have a bias against Devontae. Finnegan Burke applauds his lawyer and lover Harley for her work in the courtroom, expressing his desire to kiss her. Since neither of them see anyone around, that's exactly what they decide to do, unaware that Terry saw them. When Gianni Russo arrives at his family estate, his wife Heidi notices that he's in a bad mood, Then he informs her that he and Quinlan Franklin are no longer together, which she's relieved to hear about. Despite that, Gianni still wants a divorce. Just as she expresses that she understands how much she hurt Gianni, he snaps at her, claiming that she doesn't know, revealing that he ran Finnegan over back in the day. Shocked, Heidi tells Gianni that she won't press charges against him because she loves him. Isidore Russo meets with Isabel Torres in the guest room, surprised she's still staying at the estate after the way Alan spoke to her. Isabel explains that she's only staying for her daughter Ulisa's sake. She adds that even though Alan was disrespectful, she admits how right he was about Devante, and that she has been horrible to the family when they've shown kindness, despite the circumstances. Isidore tells Isabel how that doesn't mean she has any right to be disrespected, encouraging her to pay Alan no mind. Isabel wishes that she could, since it seems like Alan is bent on destroying Theodosius's palace. This causes Isidore to tell Isabel that he promises to buy Theodosius's palace for her, but Isabel doesn't buy Isidore's offer at first, but he eventually convinces her that he's being genuine. Shocked to see Devante Torres on the ground after being shot by J.J. Dorval, Shelley pleads with her son to put the gun down. After hearing the shot, Vanessa and her grandfather Raymond rush outside to see the disturbing scene. Shelley is able to convince her son to hand the gun over to her. Once that happens, Jeremiah arrives, disturbed by what occurred when he left and troubled by what he heard. He proceeds to check if Devante has a pulse while Raymond calls 911. Jeremiah is able to find a pulse, then the ambulance arrives. Shelley asks her husband what their next move should be. Quinlan is in her apartment as Ben calls her, asking him if he decided to help her expose Adaku. Ben answers that he has decided to help. Relieved, she thanks Ben for agreeing to do so, then informs him that she and Gianni are no longer together. Ben claims that he doesn't care, but Quinlan felt like he should know. He replies that he would have found out eventually, reminding Quinlan that it doesn't erase the fact that she had an affair with his father. Quinlan agrees with Ben, assuring him that she'll never be with Gianni again, once again apologizing for the pain it caused. Ben tells Quinlan to keep her apologies, then ends the call. Isidore gathers Lorenzo, Clarice, Heidi, Gianni, and Alan together at the estate, explaining that Isabel and Ulisa had to rush out because Devante was shot. Lorenzo hopes that Devante pulls through so that he can face justice, but Clarice expresses how she doesn't want Devante to make it through. This causes the family to be at odds, since they argue about whether Devante should live or not. Isabel and Ulisa meet Pacho and Nichelle at the hospital, asking them if they heard any news about Devante's condition. Pacho and Nichelle express that they haven't heard anything. Then Nichelle expresses concern about Devante not being able to make it. Doing her best to comfort her daughter, Isabel tells Nichelle that Devante isn't one to give up on life so easily. Ulisa offers to pray for Devante, but Nichelle isn't having it. She goes on to blame God for the mess they're in at the moment, questioning if he will even care about their situation. Pacho feels like the best thing to do is get in touch with Devante's lawyer, expressing how he needs to figure out what Devante planned in case something happened to him. This angers Nichelle, wondering if her brother doesn't want their father to make it. Pacho replies that no matter what any of them wants, it won't stop them from dealing with something that's out of their hands, feeling like they need to be prepared. Trying to keep the siblings from fighting even more, Isabel points out how neither of them explained who shot Devante to begin with. Nichelle is certain that JJ shot Devante after the way he acted while they were at school. As for Ulisa, she feels like if JJ did shoot Devante, then it was only because Devante was a danger to the family. Hearing this infuriates Nichelle. Then Isabel asks Pacho to stay with Ulisa. Once the siblings are alone, Ulisa asks her older brother if he does hope that their father pulls through, or if he sees this as a perfect opportunity to take Theodosius's palace. Instead of answering Ulisa's question, Pacho asks his younger sister if she needs a snack. When Ulisa replies with sure, she prays for God to have mercy on her father and spare his life. Finnegan arrives at the Dorval estate, asking Jeremiah and Shelley what happened. When the couple express that they won't answer without their lawyer present, Finnegan tells them how it looks like this is a case of standing their ground with an intruder, telling them how it's best to get it over with. Udell arrives, apologizing for being late. Once Udell arrives at the estate, Finnegan comments about seeing more of him than he would have liked. Udell reminds Finnegan that he was called for a different circumstance, advising Finnegan to ask his questions and get this done quickly. Just as Finnegan asks Jeremiah and Shelley what happened, she explains how Devante came, refused to leave, and that she pulled a gun out on him. Upon hearing this, Finnegan asks Shelley if she shot him. Once she answers that she didn't, he asks who. Reluctantly, Shelley reveals that JJ shot him. When Finnegan asks if he can speak with JJ, Jeremiah and Shelley explain that he's shaken up. Udell adds that JJ is a schizophrenic teen on top of that, so Jeremiah and Shelley's accounts are all that he needs. Finnegan decides to leave it alone, then walks off. Jeremiah and Shelley appreciate Udell coming, especially knowing that there's a special connection. Udell tells the Dorvals that Devante took enough and won't stand to see him take more. When Udell leaves, Shelley questions what they'll do if JJ doesn't make it. Jeremiah tells his wife how he's not sure, but they'll trust in God to guide the way. At Confidence Designs, Owen enters Wanda's office, asking her how she feels about Devante being in the hospital after being shot, wondering if she wants Devante to pull through. Wanda states how the world would be a better place without Devante in it, feeling like the world would have been a better place if Elvira was still alive. She goes on to express how much she misses her late friend. Noticing how emotional she is, Owen pulls Wanda in a hug, then Udell walks in, questioning what's going on. Wanda tells Udell that Owen came in to check up on her. Udell supposedly thanks Owen for being a good friend to Wanda, asking him to have time with his wife. As soon as Owen leaves, Udell tells Wanda that she should keep her distance from Owen. Confused, Wanda asks if he's making this suggestion just because of the hug. He explains that Owen was initially questioning Yvette's change of heart regarding dropping charges against Max Russo, fearing that the closer she gets to Owen, the more likely he is to find out. At the Dorval estate, Jeremiah asks Shelley if JJ has agreed to take his medication. Shelley informs her husband that JJ is refusing to, expressing how she doesn't know what to do. When Jeremiah states that they only have one option, Jeremiah suggests that they hospitalize JJ. Upon hearing this, Shelley rejects the idea. Even though Jeremiah states that what JJ's going through is out of their hands, Shelley tries to come up with every excuse to keep their son home. Eventually, she agrees to Jeremiah's suggestion, then informs JJ that he'll be going away for a short time. This is when the mental health professionals arrive and forcibly take JJ away, breaking both Jeremiah and Shelley's hearts. Isidore enters Isabel's room, asking her how she's dealing with Devante's condition. Isabel tells Isidore that since Devante is in a coma at the moment, she's just awaiting for news on him waking up, wondering if he will wake up. Isidore asks Isabel if she wants Devante to wake up. Isabel states how it's her children that she's worried about, expressing how the father they still love is fighting for his life, feeling guilty that she hopes that he doesn't pull through, feeling that it's what he deserves after all that he's taken away. Isidore tells Isabel that she doesn't have to feel guilty at all, pointing out that even though Devante is the father of her children, it doesn't make him any less of a monster. She states that she fears that Devante losing his life will only tear her family apart. He goes on to tell Isabel not to underestimate herself, feeling like she's more than capable of keeping the family together. Not only does Isabel express concern about her family being torn apart, but she worries about what Devante's passing would mean for Theodosius's palace. Once again, Isidore reminds Isabel that he'll do whatever he can to help her and her family keep the hotel. Isabel thanks Isidore for that, even expressing how she's thankful that he's not boasting about Devante's downfall, especially after what he did to Elvira. Isidore tells Isabel that he would never wish ill on Devante if it would cause her any pain. The two stare into one another's eyes and end up making love. Quinlan calls Pacho, asking if there's any news on Devante. Pacho tells her that he hasn't heard anything new yet, wondering what she needed to share with him. She informs him about Ben's willingness to dig up all of the info which proves that Adaku is a Danjuma. The only concern which Pacho has is Adaku working hard to figure out who exposed her. As for Quinlan, she's not concerned about Adaku looking at their direction. Eventually, Ben calls Quinlan to inform her that he found Adaku's birth certificate and sent it to a news station to expose the truth nationwide. Shelley is visibly upset and Jeremiah asks his wife how she's doing. Angered, she tells Jeremiah to guess how she's doing after seeing their son being dragged out of their home. She suggests that JJ might not have snapped if Jeremiah hadn't agreed to speak about Devante on national TV. Hurt, Jeremiah questions if Shelley is blaming him for JJ's breakdown. Jeremiah reminds Shelley that he went on TV to protect the family. Frustrated, Shelley replies that his actions only made Devante want to harm the family more. Overall, Shelley feels like Jeremiah didn't protect their family. Jeremiah asks Shelley how he can make it right. The response she makes is that the damage is done and expresses how she hopes that JJ doesn't hate them for sending him away. Once she walks off, Jeremiah prays for JJ's healing, for his family's protection, and forgiveness for any mistakes he made. Adaku calls Quinlan in to request her interviewing someone. When Quinlan asks her boss who she'll be interviewing, Adaku answers that Quinlan will be interviewing her since news broke out that she's actually Adaku Danjuma. Quinlan questions if Adaku thinks that people will take her seriously since she's being interviewed on her own network. Adaku answers that she needs to be interviewed by someone she and the public can trust. Not only does Adaku express trust in Quinlan, but she tells her how having these big interviews could enhance her career. This causes Quinlan to question if there's a chance that an interview like this would grant her a program of her own. All Adaku answers with is that the possibilities are endless. Since Adaku kept her identity under wraps for so long, Quinlan asks Adaku if she has any idea who began digging into her past. Adaku tells Quinlan to save that for the interview. Quinlan claims that she's sorry about what Adaku is going through. Adaku expresses that she'll be okay, stating that whoever couldn't keep their nose out of her business will face what's coming to them. As soon as Quinlan asks Adaku what she's going to do, Adaku asks Quinlan to let her be alone. At Russo Jewelers, Alan asks his father why he's late. After Isidore thinks about hooking up with Isabel, Isidore tells Alan not to worry about it. Since Isidore has arrived, Alan tells his father that since Devante is in a coma, it gives them the perfect opportunity to strike. Before Isidore tells his son that he doesn't want to hear it, Alan tells his father that they can make a statement about Devante breaking into the Dorval estate, explaining how he ended up in the hospital in the first place. Annoyed, Isidore tells Alan to drop it, which only confuses Alan. Isidore asks Alan how he thinks Isabel will feel, knowing that Alan is doing something like this publicly. The reply which Alan gives is that he doesn't care about Isabel's feelings. Isidore proceeds to ask Alan if he cares about how Ulissa will be affected by this. Alan goes on to state how this isn't personal, but business, which he points out is something that Isidore taught him, adding that he also taught him to destroy their enemies are on their knees, questioning if he's gone soft on Isabel, reminding his father that he promised he wouldn't. Before Isidore has a chance to answer, Vivian shows up, asking if everything is okay. Isidore tells his secret half-sister that everything is okay, but Alan tells Vivian that he and his father are having business differences, then walks off. Vivian asks Isidore if he'd like her to speak with Alan. Isidore feels like Vivian would only be wasting her time, but won't stop her. Outside of Isidore's office, Vivian asks Alan if he'd like to talk about what's upsetting. Alan states that he can't go into detail, but feels like his father's emotions are getting in the way of making a huge business decision. Vivian tells her nephew that if he feels that way, then he should do what's best for business. Alan thanks Vivian, walks off, then Vivian tells herself how she can't wait for the fallout, eventually waiting to tear the entire family apart. At the hospital, Isabel asks Nichelle if she actually wants to spend the remainder of her spring break in a hospital. Nichelle tells her mother that it will be worth it as long as Devante doesn't feel lonely. Isabel requests time alone with Devante, which Nichelle grants. Alone with her husband, Isabel unleashes all of her bent-up anger, telling Devante that her love for him wasn't real, especially since he hid who he truly was from her. Even though Isabel feels like she wasted years with him, she's grateful for the 3 children he gave her. This causes her to express how sorrowful she feels about not being able to have the child with the only man she ever loved, reminding Devante about the one-night stand she had with Isidore, but informs him about getting pregnant by Isidore and terminating the pregnancy to save their marriage, which wasn't worth saving. She goes on about how Isidore is a much better man and lover than he ever could be. Since she robbed herself of knowing the child she would have had with Isidore, Isabel wishes Devante would burn in hell. As soon as Isabel walks off, Devante opens his eyes, revealing that he heard Isabel's revelation. Welcome to the 15th week of this year's In Times Like These recap. Now, let's get into this. Starting with Nichelle Torres, who runs into her ex, Zeke Franklin, in the hallway of her home, Theodosius's palace. She asks Zeke what he wants. He begins to ask Nichelle how Devante is doing. She tells Zeke that it's none of his business. Then Zeke asks Nichelle how she's doing, causing her to reply with the same answer. Zeke tells Nichelle that she was the first person he thought of when news broke out about Devante's shooting. Nichelle replies by telling Zeke how he should have thought of something else, stating that he clearly didn't think about her when he cheated on her with Yvette. He makes it clear that he only thought about how hurt Nichelle would be if she found out. Since he informs her that he thought about it, Nichelle asks her ex why he proceeded to do so. Zeke reminds Nichelle that he can't control himself, but Nichelle reminds Zeke that he always has a choice and that he chose to be unfaithful, asking Zeke to leave. At the Russo estate, Isidore Russo runs into his ex, Isabel Torres, informing her that he can't stop thinking about the time they hooked up, wondering how they're gonna move forward. She states that she's unsure. He goes on to state that after all of the years they've been separated, they clearly can't keep their hands off of one another. Isabel tells Isidore that it's their history together, but Isidore adds that it's the love they shared together. She tries telling Isidore that they're at a point in their lives where emotions aren't clear, and because of that, they're being irrational. Isidore tells Isabel how he doesn't care how irrational it is, expressing how much he missed being with her. Isabel tells Isidore not to say anything further, reminding him how much has changed in their lives after they broke up. Isidore goes on to state how one thing hasn't changed, and it's that they're the loves of each other's lives. The response which Isabel gives is by reminding him how he's only saying that out of emotion and nostalgia, feeling like he doesn't mean it. Isidore tells Isabel that he means every word, telling her not to deny that she feels the same way. Isabel tells Isidore that the conversation is over. As she walks off, he pleads with Isabel to wait, grabbing her hand. The two gaze into each other's eyes, passionately kiss, but are interrupted as Isidore gets a notification on his phone. Sensing that something is wrong, she asks Isidore what's going on. He spits out Alan's name. After Adaku Danjuma is interviewed by Quinlan Franklin, she meets with fellow mobster Wade and the other mob families, questioning if they had anything to do with her true identity being leaked to the public. Wade and the other heads of the families inform Adaku that they had nothing to do with her identity being leaked. When Wade tells her to check her business associates, she pulls a gun out on him, feeling like his suggestion is suspicious. He asks Adaku to put the gun down to avoid a war. When she does as Wade asks, he urges her to think about whether it's a possibility that someone in her organization or an associate turned against her. This is when Adaku wonders if Devante is the one who betrayed her. At the hospital, Dr. Terry Burke visits Devante Torres' room, revealing to her that he is no longer in a coma. Yet, he confuses the doctor when he informs her that no one could know that he's awake. When she questions why, Devante refuses to answer, asking Terry to get a hold of his son, Pacho. Pacho arrives at the hospital, wondering if Devante passed away. Terry informs Pacho that Devante is alive and wants to speak with him. As Pacho is in Devante's room, Devante admits to his son that he's not as invincible as he thought, telling Pacho that if something were to happen to him, then he would need him to take over Theodosius's palace. Terry Burke surprises her husband Finnegan at his office at the police station. Just as he asks his wife what she wants, Terry informs her husband that she knows that he's having an affair with Harley Drake. At first, Finnegan denies it, but she informs him that she saw the two lovers kissing at the courthouse, threatening to go to the board to report Harley. As soon as Finnegan tells Terry that she would only look foolish reporting Harley without any proof, she sends a picture to Finnegan's phone of him kissing Harley. He begins to ask Terry what she wants. She tells Finnegan that she wants him to give her full custody of Kyiv. When he tells Terry how that's not happening, she responds by telling him that his lawyer will just lose her law license. Terry proceeds to ask if he actually cares about Harley not being able to practice law again. Finnegan goes on to remind Terry that he got with Harley after they broke up, feeling like Harley shouldn't have to suffer because of her hatred for him. Her only wish is that she wins sole custody of Kyiv so that she could prevent him from growing up like Finnegan, telling Finnegan that he has a choice to make. He tells Terry that he'll do as she asks. Before Terry walks off, she guesses that Finnegan must really love Harley. At Russo Jewelers, Vivian Jones enters her nephew Alan's office, asking if his rant about his theory of Devante being a home intruder was what Isidore disagreed with. Alan tells Vivian that in time, everything will make sense. As soon as Vivian asks Alan what he's got planned, Isidore barges in, scolding his son for disobeying him. While the two argue with one another, Isidore gets furious to the point where he slaps Alan across the face. Since Alan is speechless, Isidore reminds his son that just because he's an adult doesn't mean he gets to disrespect him, asking if Alan understands. Frustrated, Alan states that he does. Isidore leaves after apologizing to Vivian about what she witnessed. When Isidore walks off, Vivian asks Alan if he's okay. Alan states that he is, telling her that his father can smack him around all he'd like, feeling like it won't change the fact that he's right. Since Alan isn't looking at Vivian's direction, she smirks at the fact that the family is becoming divided. Ben tells Quinlan that he doesn't care what happens to Devante. Since Ben is the one who found Elvira, and with the fact that Devante took her life, she was concerned about how he was taking it. Ben tells Quinlan that he hopes she wasn't trying to take this as a chance for him to cry on her shoulder. Quinlan is adamant that she didn't come by to manipulate his emotions. In Devante's hospital room, Nichelle stands by her father's side, but is caught by surprise when Ataku enters. Confused, Nichelle asks Ataku what she's doing at the hospital room. Ataku introduces herself as Ataku Danjuma. Nichelle tells Ataku how she knows who she is, questioning why she's in the room. Adaku tells Nichelle that she and Devante go way back. Then Nichelle questions why Devante would have any connections to her, mentioning the rumors about Adaku and her family. In response, Adaku tells Nichelle that she shouldn't believe everything she hears. She goes on to question if she can have some alone time with Devante. Nichelle questions why Adaku needs to spend time with Devante when he's clearly not awake. Adaku tells Nichelle how it would be much better since Nichelle wouldn't stay with a total stranger. When Nichelle reluctantly leaves, Devante wakes up, asking Adaku if she lost her mind. Alan meets up with his mother Harley, telling her how there are days when he wishes that she won full custody of him, crying in her arms. When she asks her son what happened, Alan informs her of his disagreement with Isidore and how Isidore ended up slapping him. He goes on to inform his mother that he and Isidore plan to take over Theodosius's palace. Harley expresses her concern of her son making an enemy out of Devante Torres. Just as Alan is confused by his mother's concern, Finnegan knocks on her door, asking to speak with her. When Alan asks Harley why Finnegan is outside of her hotel room, wondering why she won't ask the police commissioner to leave, Harley asks for a moment with Finnegan. Outside of the hotel room, Harley informs her lover that Alan is inside, asking what's wrong. Finnegan informs her that Terry found out about the two of them and that she wants full custody of Kyiv in exchange for her silence. When Harley asks Finnegan what he decided to do, he informs her that he agreed to give up custody of Key, which makes Harley feel guilty. Finnegan tells Harley that she has nothing to feel guilty for, explaining that he would never forgive himself if she lost the chance to practice law because of him, admits to Harley that he loves her, then walks off. Udell arrives at Owen's office, and just as Owen asks Udell what he needs, Udell tells Owen that he needs to give Wanda some space because of the upcoming trial. Just as Owen questions if Wanda should be able to decide that for herself, Heidi walks in, asking if everything is okay. Udell decides to leave. Then Heidi asks Owen what the conversation was about. He replies that it was a private conversation, asking her to leave so that he can continue to work. Heidi apologizes, then leaves, smirking at the thought that her plans are going well. Terry calls Isidore, informing him that Devante has woken up and has decided to keep it a secret to everyone, except for Pacho. When Isidore questions why Devante has been keeping it a secret, Terry suggests that it could involve Adaku Danjuma. She goes to reveal that Adaku visited Devante at the hospital. As soon as Isidore questions how the two could be connected, Terry replies by reminding him of the boy who lost his life on spring break. She adds that his plans of taking over Theodosius's palace are in peril since Devante has decided to give Pacho the keys to the kingdom, which Isidore is pleased with. This causes Terry to question if she can stop pretending to be Devante's friend. Isidore answers that Devante took Elvira's life and still needs someone on the inside in case Devante slips up. At the high school, Nichelle approaches Zeke, asking him to spill about what he knows about Adaku and her father. Zeke tries telling Nichelle that he doesn't know what she's talking about. She goes on to plead with him not to lie to her, informing her that Adaku stopped by Devante's hospital room the other day. Since Nichelle knows that Adaku is rumored to be the one behind the Trank issue in town, she begins to ask Zeke if he knew that Adaku was the one supplying the product. Zeke responds by telling Nichelle that the less she knows, the better. Nichelle asks Zeke what he knows, pointing out that the overdose at Theodosius's palace was no coincidence. As soon as Zeke tells Nichelle that she should ask her father, she reminds Zeke that she's asking him, wondering if he's actually going to refuse to give her any answers. Zeke answers, that's exactly what he'll do. Nichelle begins to tell him that if her dad is in some sort of danger, then she should know. He begins to ask Nichelle what makes her think that her father's in danger. She tells Zeke that she doesn't know what to think since he won't tell her anything. Zeke informs her that he's not telling her anything to protect her, explaining that he'd rather have her annoyed than hurt, walking away from Nichelle. The Dorval family welcomes JJ back home, but he has a somber attitude. Shelley points out that she doesn't blame JJ for being distant, since they just watched him get dragged out of their own home, wondering if JJ will have another breakdown in the future. Raymond reminds Jeremiah and Shelley that when they found out that JJ was sick, that they knew it wouldn't be easy. Shelley points out that as his parents, they didn't make things easier. Jeremiah goes on to remind Shelley that he apologized. When Raymond asks his son what he has to apologize for, Jeremiah informs him that it's a possibility that sharing with the world how dangerous Devante is caused JJ to have a mental breakdown, which led to Devante being shot. Raymond tells the couple how JJ needs them to stay united and not against each other. When Raymond walks off, Shelley tells Jeremiah how she was out of line for telling Raymond. Jeremiah points out that Raymond and even Vanessa knew that something was wrong, pointing out that Raymond was right, and that for JJ's sake, they have to set aside their differences. She adds that for their son's sake, they also have to make sure that they don't do anything that can set him back, walking away from Jeremiah. At Heidi Russo's office, she and Finnegan ask Zeke what update he has for them. He informs them how Nichelle is getting suspicious and need to find out a way to keep her out of harm's way. Zeke adds that Adaku spoke with Nichelle as she visited Devante, pointing out that Nichelle and the rest of the Torres family could be in danger. Heidi begins to wonder why Adaku would visit Devante in the hospital since he hasn't woken up. Finnegan points out that she wouldn't check up on him out of the kindness of her heart, wondering if Devante woke up. Zeke questions why Devante would still pretend to be in a coma. Heidi reminds Zeke that he's not supposed to be asking questions. Frustrated, Zeke reminds them how Nacella could be in danger and can't let her find out about Ataku's connection with Devante. Finnegan assures Zeke that they won't let anyone get hurt. Just as Zeke asks what's going to be done to keep that from happening, Heidi tells Zeke to let them worry about it, asking Zeke to find out whether Devante is awake. When Zeke asks why he has to be the one to confirm it, Heidi points out that they could possibly another charge against him since Devante was shot as an intruder. Zeke wonders if Devante would feel like it's a bit suspicious. Finnegan feels like Zeke has a point, stating that if Devante is awake, then he'll have to prove to everyone that he'll pull through. Heidi decides to change her mind, but tells Zeke to let them know the moment he hears anything new about Devante's condition, reminding him that securing his and Adaku's conviction will keep Nichelle and her family safe. Devante surprises Isabel and Yulissa by showing that he's awake. Devante expresses that he thought Isabel and Yulissa would be happy to see that he'll live to see another day. Yulissa expresses that she is glad to see him, informing her father that she's been praying for him. After Yulissa hugs Devante, she asks him if he got shot because he was threatening the Dorvals. Nichelle tells Yulissa how this isn't the right time. Then Devante changes the subject by thanking Isabel for visiting him. When Isabel asks Devante how long he had been awake, he lies and states that he just woke up. Devante begins to ask for water, then Yulissa and Isabel agree to get him something to drink. When Nacella is alone with her father, she asks him how he knows Adaku Danjuma. Devante claims that he only knew Adaku as Adaku Bello, lying to his daughter and telling her that he had nothing to do with illegal activities. Terry is caught by surprise when Harley arrives in her office, confronting Terry about blackmailing Finnegan. Harley goes on to plead with Terry, explaining that she knows how it's like to lose custody of a child, to reconsider. Terry tells Harley that she won't let Keeve become another version of Finnegan. Harley tells Terry that she's being selfish, feeling like she's only hurting Keeve and not protecting him. Terry replies by stating that she won't take advice from her husband's new toy, feeling like Finnegan would turn on her when he gets bored just like he did when she and Finnegan were married, asking Harley to leave. Welcome to the 16th week of this year's In Times Like These recap. Now, let's get into this. Starting with Owen Grant, who enters Wanda Mitchell's office at Confidence Designs, informing her that her husband wants him to stay away when Devante's trial starts. Confused, Wanda asks Owen why Udell thinks that way. He states that Udell felt like it would be too much for Wanda to handle with Owen prosecuting Devante. Wanda assures Owen that staying in her life during the trial won't be a burden to her, which Owen appreciates hearing. He goes on to claim how he hopes that he didn't cause any more issues for her and Udell. Wanda thanks Owen for informing her, assuring him that she and Udell will be fine. Owen appreciates hearing that, telling Wanda that he would stay away as long as she told him. She proceeds to ask Owen not to be a stranger. Quinlan Franklin is on the phone with Pacho Torres, hoping that the jury not having compassion on Devante. Pacho states that the evidence should speak for itself and that in no time he'll be running Theodosia's palace, which is when Nichelle walks in. Pacho ends the call, then Nichelle asks who he was talking with. He tells her not to worry about it, but Nichelle asks her brother how he expects her not to worry about it when he just told the person on the phone that he's next in line to take over Theodosia's palace. Pacho informs his younger sister that it's true, which Nichelle doesn't take well. She begins to ask Pacho why he has to take over Theodosius' palace to care of the family. He questions if she had any desire to take over the hotel. Nichelle tells her brother how it doesn't matter what she wants. Pacho agrees, telling Nichelle that their father made his wishes clear, expressing how she should be grateful that the hotel is within the family and not in danger of being put on auction where the highest bidder could take it. When Yulissa Torres arrives at the Dorval estate, she desires to speak with JJ Dorval. Her best friend, Vanessa Dorval, tells Yulissa how that might not be a good idea. Right after Vanessa says that, JJ walks in. JJ and Yulissa check up on one another. Then he asks Yulissa if she wants to know if he shot her father. In order to protect JJ, Vanessa tells him that he shouldn't say another word. Once JJ tells his sister that Yulisa deserves the truth, Vanessa tells Yulisa how the truth is that her family didn't intend for Devante to be shot, but it's just what transpired, just like she told her before. Yulisa reminds Vanessa that she didn't see what happened and didn't tell her who shot Devante. This is when JJ admits that he did. JJ explains to Yulisa about what transpired, then she goes on to apologize to JJ and Vanessa. He tells Yulisa how she has nothing to apologize for. Concerned, Vanessa asks her younger brother what he's doing. JJ tells that Yulisa should hear their side of the story instead of Devante's lies. Commissioner Finnegan Burke arrives at the hospital, asking Devante Torres if he's ready to talk. Devante tells Finnegan how he doesn't think that he has much to talk about, stating that he was shot and ended up fighting for his life. Finnegan begins to ask Devante about what led to his shooting. The response that Devante gives is that he was having a civil conversation with Shelley, then ended up being shot. Finnegan asks Devante why he was at the Dorval estate. The story which Devante gives is that he only showed up because Jeremiah asked him to. Devante states how Jeremiah wasn't at the house, but Shelley was. This causes Finnegan to ask Devante what he and Shelley spoke about. Devante claims that they didn't get to speak much. Then the next thing he remembered was getting shot. Once Finnegan asks Devante if he knows who shot him, Devante answers that he heard the voice of a teenage boy, then ended up on the floor, asking Finnegan if JJ shot him. Finnegan confirms that it was JJ who shot him. Devante questions if JJ was arrested. When Finnegan answers that JJ wasn't arrested, Devante appears frustrated, expressing his desire to press charges against the teen. When Wanda arrives to the Mitchell estate, she asks Udell why Owen told her that he was told to keep his distance from her. Instead of answering his wife's question, Udell asks Wanda if that's what Owen agreed to do. Wanda answers that he didn't, telling her husband that she wouldn't allow it to happen. Udell tells Wanda claims that a friendship with Owen only means putting Yvette at risk. Wanda feels like Udell is being paranoid, but Udell reminds Wanda that Heidi and the Russos would use any chance to make sure Yvette faces charges for lying about Max. Even though Wanda points out that Owen and Heidi can't stand one another, Udell points out that Heidi is aware of their friendship and could use that against Owen. He goes on to state that she doesn't know how Owen will react, knowing that he was trying to get justice for Yvette when she was lying all along. Suddenly, Yvette shows up, explaining to her parents that she overheard their disagreement. Wanda claims that she and Udell have everything under control. Finnegan arrives at the Dorval estate, informing Jeremiah and Shelley how he interviewed Devante, but his version of events doesn't align. Jeremiah and Shelley go on to ask Finnegan what the next step should be. Finnegan tells the couple how they need to call Udell as soon as possible, since Devante wants to press charges against JJ. Angered, Jeremiah and Shelley state how they had every right to shoot Devante since he was a danger. Unfortunately, Finnegan points out that it's Shelley's words against Devante's, since she, JJ, and Devante were the only ones around. Once Finnegan leaves, Shelley points how frustrated she is that once she thought Devante would pay for the damage, he would try to create more mess. Jeremiah tries to assure his wife that Devante won't be victorious. Whether Devante is victorious or not, Shelley worries that JJ will have a setback soon after he got back home. Jeremiah encourages his wife to stay close to God, then prays for their situation. Quinlan enters the living room, finding her younger brother Zeke looking worried. When she asks what sort of trouble Heidi placed him in, Zeke tells his sister that he's thinking about Nichelle. Worried, Quinlan asks Zeke what concerns him about Nichelle. He informs her that Adaku approached Nichelle recently. He also goes on to state how worried he is about Nichelle digging for answers. This causes Quinlan to ask Zeke if he'll tell Nichelle the truth. Zeke believes that if he tells Nichelle the truth, then it will only make her a target. She states that if she keeps trying to dig for the truth, then she'll be a target anyway. He states how that's why Adaku needs to be taken down quickly before Nichelle figures everything out on her own. Quinlan assures her brother that Devante will go to prison and that Adaku won't be far behind him. Upon hearing this, Zeke expresses that he wishes he could be as hopeful, telling Quinlan that even though Adaku was exposed as a Danjuma, doesn't mean that she can't evade the police. Quinlan points out that Adaku has run the organization without the police looking towards her direction, certain that she won't be able to handle the pressure and slip. Even if Devante and Adaku go down, Zeke feels like that will only push him further away from Nichelle. When Quinlan questions why, Zeke points out that this is another secret that he kept from her. At the hospital, Adaku asks Devante when he'll be checked out of the hospital. Devante tells Adaku that he'll be out soon, asking Adaku not to visit him again, since it would be a bad look for him with the upcoming trial. Adaku tells Devante that it's what he'd get if he exposed her. Frustrated, Devante reminds Adaku that he wasn't the one who exposed her true identity to the world. Because of that, Adaku tells Devante that since he denies any involvement, then he should do his best to help her find out who exposed her. He begins to remind Adaku that he's her business partner and not her lapdog, advising that she get her henchmen to do it. She begins to ask Devante why he's so unwilling to help since he claims to be innocent. Devante answers that he doesn't want to waste his time, telling Adaku that she's being paranoid again. Adaku begins to ask Devante if he blames her, stating that she doesn't know who to trust. When Devante claims that it's probably because Adaku has become too trusting lately, she asks him what he means by that. Devante tells Adaku that if he could guess who would want to expose her, then he would guess Quinlan Franklin. He goes on to inform her that when Quinlan interviewed him, she was curious as to how they were connected, asking Adaku what makes her think that Quinlan didn't do a bit of digging. Finnegan visits Harley in her hotel room, and she asks him if he's certain that he's ready to sign his rights away as a father. He tells Harley that he's not, but is ready to move forward in their relationship. Just as he says those words, Harley tells her lover that she can't let him do this, wondering if they could compromise with Terry. Finnegan is certain that Terry doesn't want to compromise, stating that she only wants to hurt him because he hurt her. Harley suggests that they put an end to their affair, but Finnegan isn't willing to let her go. As the two lovers kiss, Alan barges in and is shocked by what he walked into. Even though Harley attempts to explain, Alan doesn't want to hear it and storms off. At Russo Jewelers, Vivian asks her older half-brother Isidore if he's so opposed to Alan's attacks against the Torres family because of his previous relationship with Isabel. Even though Isidore admits to being in love with Isabel, he claims that Alan going after Devante will cause nothing but trouble. Vivian asks why Isidore would care what sort of trouble would come out of it, since Devante took the life of Isidore's younger sister, Elvira. The answer which Isidore replies with is that they need to separate personal conflicts apart from business. He goes on to admit that Alan is ambitious, but tells Vivian that Alan is too ambitious for his own good. When he expresses that he fears Alan would run the hotel to the ground, Vivian smirks, feeling like her plan to tear the family apart is falling into place. Nichelle and Pacho welcome Devante back home. Then when Pacho leaves the room, Nichelle asks her father if Pacho is truly the next in line to take over the hotel. Devante admits it, telling his daughter that Pacho came back and made up for lost time. Nichelle tells her father that Pacho is just playing him. Upon hearing this, Devante asks Nichelle where this is coming from. Nichelle asks her father if he thinks that it's just too convenient that Pacho came back when he faced charges. Devante feels like it was convenient, pointing out that when Pacho arrived back in town, he questioned if Devante was guilty, until the two of them had a conversation and Pacho believed in his innocence. Nichelle wonders if her father is sure of that, asking him why he's not considering the fact that Pacho came back to take advantage of the situation, hoping that Devante would get convicted so that Pacho would be in charge of their fortune. Pacho arrives, asking Nichelle if she's still going on about her conspiracy theories. Nichelle is certain that it's not a conspiracy theory, telling her brother that she won't let him take their father for a fool. Devante assures his daughter that no one will take him for a fool. Devante excuses himself. Then Pacho tells Nichelle how he hopes that she stops trying to make him public enemy number one. Nichelle tells Pacho that if he gives up his claim to the hotel, then she might. Devante makes a call to someone, requesting to meet, revealing that it's Jeremiah. Adaku meets with Quinlan, telling her that she has a special task for her to accomplish. As soon as Quinlan asks her boss what the task is, Adaku reveals that she wants Quinlan to figure out who exposed her true identity. Since Quinlan is behind the leak, she tries to give her boss different excuses as to why she can't help. This causes Adaku to ask the reporter why Quinlan is unwilling to help. Quinlan claims that she is willing, but doesn't feel like she can help like Adaku believes she can. When Adaku expresses that she believes in Quinlan, this is when Quinlan feels stuck. Owen shows up to Udell's office, asking why he was called to his office. Udell answers that he didn't want Heidi to be in their business, but also wants to know why Owen didn't respect his wishes. Owen states that he needed to ask Wanda herself if she would rather he stay away, since they're friends, questioning if Udell is jealous of their friendship. Since Udell and Wanda grew up together, Udell states that he's not jealous whatsoever. Even though Udell states that he's not jealous, Owen points out how it seems like Udell feels threatened by something since he keeps contacting him to keep his distance. He proceeds to ask Udell what he's so afraid of. Udell tells Owen that he's not afraid of anything. Owen asks Udell if he's sure of that, pointing out that when Udell couldn't find it in his heart to forgive Wanda, his own wife, Wanda turned to him for comfort. He goes on to tell Udell that his actions is what made him and Wanda such great friends. Angered, Udell tells Owen to get out of his office. Shelley approaches Jeremiah, asking her husband what's wrong. Jeremiah informs her that Devante called him, offering to drop the charges against JJ as long as they don't press any charges against him and that he stay away from the trial. Confused, Jeremiah tells his wife that he didn't think Shelley would make that suggestion after everything that happened. Shelley admits that after thinking and praying, that she was too hard on Jeremiah for what they endured when Devante is the one at fault, apologizing for blaming Jeremiah. He admits to his wife that he could have handled everything better. Shelley tells Jeremiah that this is his chance to do better, telling her husband that she supports him 100%. Devante gets a call from Jeremiah, expressing how glad he is that he called soon. Jeremiah tells Devante that he won't be intimidated, telling Devante that he deserves everything he gets. At the Russo estate, Isidore meets with an irritated Alan, informing him that Terry revealed that Pacho is the next in line to take over Theodosius's palace. Upon hearing this, Alan feels like the simple resolution is to buy out Theodosius's palace from Pacho. Isidore tells Alan that if Devante goes to prison and when Pacho takes over, the guests might start pouring in, telling his son that they need to give up the plan. When Alan reminds his father that he needs to make up for his lost inheritance, Isidore tells his son not to make any more plots behind his back. Then Alan asks his father if he's gonna slap him again. Suddenly, Isabel walks in, asking if everything is okay. Annoyed, Alan tells Isabel that it's none of her concern, telling her that it's family business. When he walks off, Isidore apologizes. Isabel tells Isidore that she's not bothered, filling him in on the fact that Pacho will take over Theodosius' palace, and with Devante's trial coming up, she'll be going back home. Isidore doesn't let her in on the fact that he already knew, congratulating her. He also hopes that she doesn't become a stranger, expressing how he still wants to rebuild what's been broken. When Isabel states that it's too soon, Isidore kisses Isabel, telling her that he'll wait until she's ready. Quinlan calls Pacho, informing how Adaku is asking her to find out who leaked her true identity to the world. She adds that Adaku wouldn't give her a choice, and that rejecting Adaku's request would have been too risky. Quinlan explains that she fears that Adaku is questioning everyone, when her hope was that Adaku would only be suspicious of Devante. Since they're the ones who were behind the leak, Pacho suggests that Quinlan try to trick Adaku in some way. Quinlan questions if Adaku would be easily tricked. She goes on to ask Pacho if he can make the tough decision to tell Devante what he knows about Adaku and to get Devante to admit to taking Elvira's life and make a deal by snitching on Adaku. Welcome to the 17th week of this year's In Times Like These recap. Now, let's get into this. Starting with Vivian Jones, who checks in on her nephew Alan in his office. Unaware that Vivian is his aunt, Alan thanks her, but she notices that Alan is in a bad mood. He reveals to Vivian that he planned to take over Theodosius's palace. This causes Vivian to ask Alan why he was after the hotel. Alan is unwilling to reveal to Vivian that he lost half of his inheritance, then expresses how his father Isidore wants him to give up on the plan. Yet Alan decides to disregard his father's orders and attempts to make Pacho seem unfit to run Theodosius's palace. Vanessa Dorval asks her younger brother JJ how he feels about being back at school. JJ tells Vanessa that he's just ready to get through with the day. To the siblings' surprise, Nichelle Torres approaches them, going off on JJ for shooting her father Devante. Vanessa demands that Nichelle back off. Unwilling to step down, Nichelle tells Vanessa that she wishes she told JJ to back off when he shot Devante, unwilling to believe that her father was a danger to the Dorval family. Yulisa approaches the group, telling her older sister that she believes JJ, which upsets Nichelle. Nichelle replies by stating that JJ had no business shooting their father, revealing that Devante decided to press charges. Then Yvette Mitchell arrives. Nichelle tells everyone that she's beginning to feel nauseous at the sight of Yvette, then walks off as Yulisa apologizes and walks after her sister. When Yvette asks JJ how he's doing, JJ asks Vanessa to let him speak with Yvette alone. Yvette states that she understands that JJ was upset with her the last time they spoke. JJ interrupts Yvette, reminding her that he was upset after hearing about how she lied about Max. Even though she doesn't admit to her deception, she explains that when she heard about JJ's breakdown, she never stopped thinking about him. JJ tells Yvette that she never entered his mind. He goes on to state that he'll continue not to think about her, explaining that the last time Yvette entered his mind, he stopped taking his meds, then walks off, upsetting Yvette. Meeting in the Theodosius Palace hallway, Devante Torres asks Adaku Danjuma if she was able to figure out whether Quinlan exposed her. She replies by informing Devante that she asked Quinlan to track down whoever exposed her. Devante tells Adaku that she's only making Quinlan go in circles, certain that she's behind the leak. She goes on to remind Devante that Quinlan is covering his case, suggesting that he might just want Quinlan out of the way. Even though he admits to wanting to get rid of Quinlan, he states that Quinlan is very curious. Adaku reminds Devante that Quinlan is a reporter, but feels like there's no way she could have discovered her identity on her own. This is when Devante suggests that Quinlan might have worked with someone else. When Adaku questions who, Devante reminds her that Zeke is her younger brother, and that she might have found out how he makes money and would want to take down the organization which he supplies product for. Quinlan Franklin arrives at Ben Russo's office, informing him that Adaku is asking her to track down whoever leaked her birth certificate. Ben questions if Quinlan will make him her fall guy. She is adamant that she would never do anything like that, telling Ben how much she still cares about him. He tells her not to say those sort of words, telling her that she can't use her fears to make him feel remorse for her. Quinlan states that she's not looking for remorse, but for a way out, asking Ben if he really feels nothing but hatred towards her. Instead of answering her question, Ben tells Quinlan that if she truly wants a way out, then she should go to Pacho. She informs Ben that she did go to Pacho and with the plan to get Devante to snitch on Adaku and make a deal with the police. This angers Ben, telling Quinlan that Devante shouldn't spend a minimum amount of time in prison for taking Elvira's life just to spare Quinlan's. He goes on to ask Quinlan if Pacho agreed to her request. Quinlan states that Pacho rejected her request, understanding how awful it was, but expresses how desperate she was to stay alive. When she expresses her concern of being unable to outsmart Adaku, Ben reminds Quinlan how resourceful she is, certain that she can find enough evidence to put Adaku away for good, where Adaku won't be a danger to her. She thanks Ben for hearing her out, hoping that she can live another day where she can miss how close they were in the past. JJ and Vanessa arrive back home as Jeremiah and Shelley ask the two how school went. They explain how Nichelle stated that Devante will be pressing charges against JJ. Jeremiah and Shelley admit that it's the case, encouraging their kids to trust that God will get Devante convicted for taking Elvira Russo's life. Most of all, they encourage JJ not to let Devante scare him, assuring JJ that he did nothing wrong. Even though JJ understands that, he admits to his parents that he still has nightmares, making him feel guilty. Jeremiah and Shelley assure his son how that's normal, explaining that shooting anyone is traumatizing, assuring him that he'll get through it, but shouldn't have to be punished for it. Devante notices how upset Nichelle is when she arrives at the penthouse. She tells her father about her frustration with Yulisa taking the Dorval side over him. Devante tells his daughter how it only matters that she knows the truth, explaining how he can't have the family any more divided when the trial arrives. Nichelle apologizes, asking her father how he feels. He tells his daughter that he's ready to get everything done with and get on with his life. Nichelle asks her father if he's sure that he's not worried about the outcome of the trial. Upon hearing the question, Devante reminds Nichelle how he's the parent and she shouldn't have to worry about him. Most of all, he claims to be innocent, then consoles his daughter, assuring Nichelle that he's not going anywhere. Finnegan Burke gets a call from Quinlan Franklin, informing him that Adaku asked her to track down the person who leaked her true identity. As the two converse on the phone, Quinlan suggests that they get Pacho to become an associate of Adaku's in order to take down Adaku's organization. On the street corner, Zeke is caught by surprise when Adaku approaches him, asking him if Quinlan knows about the work he does for her. He lies and claims that Quinlan is oblivious and remained clueless after he was arrested for substance possession at the high school months prior. Adaku goes on to question how he was able to get DA Russo to drop the charges against him. Zeke informs Adaku that Quinlan used to be friends with the DA's son, Ben Russo. When Adaku mentions that she's aware that Ben is a private investigator, Zeke explains that Quinlan and Ben had a falling out after Ben discovered Quinlan had an affair with the DA's husband. He begins asking Adaku why she wants to know all of this. She states that Quinlan is an intelligent woman, asking Zeke to keep Quinlan far away from her business, and she won't have to visit him again. Inside of Heidi's office, Zeke informs her and Finnegan that Adaku approached him. As for Finnegan, he states that it's not as random as she thinks, explaining that Adaku asked Quinlan to track down who leaked her true identity. Just as Zeke tells Finnegan how he needs to make sure that Quinlan doesn't get in harm's way, Heidi tells Zeke that his sister got herself in this mess and can get herself out. Angered, Zeke points out that just because Quinlan slept with Gianni doesn't mean she deserves to have her life taken. Angered, Heidi reminds Zeke that she has every right to drop the deal and throw him straight into prison. Finnegan tells Heidi how that won't be necessary, then informs them how Quinlan has already found a way out of this situation. Vivian arrives at Theodosius's palace to visit Pacho. As he expresses how glad he is to see her, Vivian informs him about Alan's plan to make him seem unfit to run the hotel. Pacho appreciates Vivian for giving him the heads up. Then Vivian asks for his alliance in return. She doesn't reveal that she's Lorenzo Russo's secret, illegitimate daughter, but states that she is going after the Russo's fortune. Pacho agrees to help. Then Vivian walks off after they exchange numbers. Once Vivian is gone, Pacho receives a call from Quinlan, asking him to become an associate of Adaku's. At the Russo estate, Harley scolding him for striking their son and allowing him to go after Theodosius' palace. She goes on to ask if Isabel knows about their initial plan. Isidore warns Harley not to say a single word to Isabel. This causes her to ask Isidore why he's so concerned about Isabel, asking if he still has feelings for the woman she could never amount to. Before Isidore has a chance to respond, Alan enters, asking his mother what she's doing at the estate. Harley tells Alan how they didn't have a chance to speak, asking to speak with him alone. Alan begins to ask his mother why she's so embarrassed to tell his father that she and Finnegan are having an affair. Enraged, Isidore begins to question if Harley has truly lost her mind. Harley tells Isidore how it's none of his business. Then Alan tells Harley that he still doesn't want to hear her explanations. He goes on to tell his mother to prepare for the entire family to be against her as she defends the man who took Elvira's life. Surprising Terry in her office at the hospital, Devante informs her that he'd like her to be a character witness for the upcoming trial. After trying to persuade him that it's not a good idea, Terry reluctantly agrees to his request. Before Devante leaves, he thanks Terry with a kiss. Once he's gone, the kiss leaves Terry troubled. Quinlan is on the phone, convincing Pacho to become an associate of Adaku and that it's the best way to take down Adaku's empire. Reluctantly, Pacho agrees to Quinlan's plan. Owen enters Wanda's office, asking how she's feeling about the upcoming trial. Wanda begins to tell Owen how it won't feel real until she's in the courtroom. He assures Wanda that it's real and that he'll fight Devante with everything he's got. As for Wanda, she fears that her testimony might not be enough. Owen feels like Wanda's testimony is beneficial, reminding her that she's the one who can confirm that Devante left the party at Theodosia's palace the night that he took Elvira's life. Even though she knows that she'll be telling the truth, she fears that Harley will try to paint her as a liar. He tells Wanda that she's one of the most honest people that he knows. Wanda urges him to rethink that, reminding him that she basically protected the man who took her best friend's life for years because she wasn't being honest. Owen assures Wanda that it's never too late to do what's right, and that before she knows it, the 20-year-old nightmare will be over. Wanda disagrees, stating that even if Devante is convicted, the nightmare will never be over since Elvira is never coming back, influencing Owen to hug her. In Harley's room, Finnegan asks his lover if she was able to make amends with Alan. She states that Alan is still angry with her, feeling like he wouldn't be this angry if she wasn't defending Devante. Finnegan asks his lover if she's certain that Devante won't be convicted. Harley begins to ask Finnegan if they could drop the conversation. He tells Harley that if she has any doubts about being able to win the case for Devante, then she can tell him about it. Harley tells Finnegan that it's too risky to doubt her ability to win the case for Devante. Finnegan begins to ask Harley what she means by that. Harley tells Finnegan to forget it. Finnegan decides to leave it alone, but assures her that if Devante is pressuring her about anything, then he promises to take care of her. Ben is caught by surprise when Devante is at his office. When Ben asks Devante what he wants, Devante would like to know if the two of them have an understanding. This causes Ben to ask what sort of understanding he and Devante would have to come up with. Devante states how he hasn't heard of any news of the diary being uncovered. Ben asks Devante if it makes him nervous knowing that he's the only one who knows where the diary is. The answer which Devante gives is that he's not nervous, since he's certain that the diary will never come to light. Ben begins to ask Devante how he's so sure, wondering if he's going to have him eliminated. Scoffing, Devante tells Ben how that would make him look so sketchy, especially with the trial coming soon. Even though Ben points out that Devante would want him out of the way, Devante states that if the diary were to have been uncovered, then the police would have had it by now. When Ben asks Devante what he wants to hear, Devante asks Ben if he'll deal with any surprises during court. The answer which Ben gives is that Devante might just have to wait and see. Devante is certain that he'll see Ben in court, but points out that if he sees Elvira's diary in court, then Ben will lose the only piece of Elvira that he has left. Before Devante leaves, he asks Ben if he could live with himself for letting go of Elvira's diary. Welcome to the 18th week of this year's In Times Like These recap. Now, let's get into this. Starting with Isabel Torres, who arrives at the courthouse with her daughter Yulisa. As the two meet with Nichelle, Isabel walks off and bumps into Isidore Russo. When Isidore asks Isabel how she feels about her husband Devante standing trial for taking the life of his sister Elvira Russo, Isabel answers that she's not looking forward to taking the stand, but is ready to do her part in making Devante pay for all of his crimes. As soon as Isabel assures Isidore that Devante will pay for what he took from the Russos, she walks off, running into Devante and his lawyer Harley Drake. Devante tells his wife that she doesn't want to go against him. Unfazed, Isabel tells Devante that since he took Elvira's life, he'll have to face the consequences. When Isabel walks off, Harley pleads with Devante not to embarrass Isabel in front of the whole town and their children. Devante tells his lawyer that Isabel is bringing it on herself. Heidi Russo walks up to Quinlan Franklin, discussing her and Pacho's plan to infiltrate Adaku Danjuma's organization. Heidi asks Quinlan if she feels proud knowing that he has to risk his life to spare hers. Quinlan tells Heidi that she feels relieved knowing that they can take down the entire Danjuma organization, feeling like her younger brother Zeke will finally be free of a life of crime. Heidi points out that even if Adaku is taken down, Zeke can still find other ways to get himself into trouble. Quinlan tells Heidi how Zeke would have learned his lesson after all of this. Heidi replies by reminding Quinlan that Zeke didn't learn when he was arrested, feeling like if he did, then her son wouldn't have almost lost his life. Even though Quinlan feels sorry for Max, she reminds Heidi that Max made his choices, which angers Heidi. Suddenly, Gianni walks up to them, demanding that Heidi leave Quinlan alone. As they sit down, the Russos notice Vivian Jones entering into the courtroom. Pacho Torres arrives at Adaku's office at Global News Press, asking to be an associate of her organization. Adaku is skeptical, wondering if Devante put him up to this. Playing dumb, Pacho questions what his father has to do with his request. The response which Adaku gives is that she wants honesty, telling Pacho that she doesn't like being lied to. Pacho claims that he's not lying, asking Adaku one more time if she's willing to work with him. Ben Russo has fallen off the wagon again in his condo and begins hallucinating his late Aunt Elvira, encourages her nephew to sober up, drive over to the courthouse, and speak the truth along with her diary. He tells Elvira that he can't just hand over the diary. Elvira gives Ben permission, telling him that she doesn't need it anymore. Ben tells Elvira that he needs her, telling his aunt how much he missed her. She tells Ben how much she misses him too, but tells him that he doesn't need a diary to feel closer to her, but to remember how much she loved him. Elvira goes on to state that he must do whatever it takes to make sure Devante doesn't get away with what he did. Just as Elvira tells Ben how much she loves him, she assures her nephew that he'll never forget her, disappearing. As soon as Ben wakes up and finds that Elvira is gone, he breaks down. Wanda Mitchell is brought to the stand, speaks about her friendship with Elvira and how Elvira confessed to cheating on Udell with Devante. When Harley cross-examines her, she paints Wanda as an uncredible witness and Elvira as a liar. Ben is brought to the stand, explaining what he remembers, and Harley tries to paint him as an uncredible witness because of his battle with addiction. Isabel is brought to the stand, sharing her belief in Devante's guilt. When Harley cross-examines Isabel, she gets Isabel to confess that she not only cheated on Devante with Isidore, but that she also terminated the pregnancy after Isidore got her pregnant. Enraged, Isabel tells the entire courtroom that she'll never get to know her own baby because she held on to a man who was a liar, adulterer, and a monster. The judge decides to continue court for a later date. Then Isabel is confronted by her kids as Yulissa asks her mother how she could terminate the pregnancy. Nichelle and Pacho defend their mother. Yet Yulissa is troubled at the thought that both of her parents have taken the lives of innocent people, scolding her mother for taking the life of her own child. This causes Nichelle and Yulissa to go back and forth. Isabel is unable to deal with the argument, then rushes off. Pacho finds his mother crying and tries to comfort her by stating that he understands why she terminated her pregnancy. As for Isabel, she tells her son that terminating her pregnancy is something that she'll always regret, crying into his arms. Isidore, shocked by Isabel's confession, walks off. Vivian approaches the family at a bad time since Clarice is angered that Isabel got rid of Isidore's baby. Vivian tries telling the Russos that she came to support them. The Russos appreciate her support, except for Clarice, who feels like Vivian is seeking something from them. Lorenzo and the Russos don't buy into Clarice's theory, once again, thanking Vivian for supporting them. As the Russos walk off, Vivian tells herself that everything the Russos have is her birthright. Devante congratulates Harley for her work so far, but she tells Devante how sick she feels, forcing Isabel to admit to the entire town of Valley Park about her most intimate, difficult decision. As for Devante, he has no regrets, going on about how glad he is that Isabel got rid of her child with Isidore. Sick of the sight of Devante, she walks away from him. As Terry Burke tries to sneak out of the courtroom, Devante catches her. He proceeds to thank Terry for stopping by, expressing how he's certain that the trial will work out for his favor. Ben approaches Finnegan Burke, informing the police commissioner that he'll hand him Elvira's diary. When Finnegan reminds Ben that he never explained how he got the diary, Ben reveals that Terry held on to it this whole time. Confused, Finnegan questions why his ex-wife was in possession of Elvira's diary. Ben tells Finnegan that if he takes the time to read it, then he'll figure out why. Adaku meets with Devante at Theodosius's palace, asking if he told Pacho about their connection. Devante assures Adaku that he hasn't, asking her why she wants to know. Not telling him about Pacho's request, Adaku asks Devante if he'll train Pacho up to work beside her if Devante goes to prison. Devante tells Adaku to let him worry about that. When Isabel arrives at the Russo estate after spending the night at the hotel, Clarice tells Isabel that she's no longer welcomed at her house because she terminated the pregnancy after she and Isidore conceived a child. Clarice goes on to question how Isabel could hate Isidore that much, especially after all he had done for her. Isabel assures Clarice that she doesn't hate Isidore. As soon as Clarice compares Isabel to Devante, Isabel defends herself. Unwilling to listen to Isabel's point of view, Clarice tells Isabel that she wants her to stay away from Isidore. At Theodosius's palace, Isidore meets with Harley, asking how long she knew about Isabel terminating the pregnancy. When she assures him that she never knew throughout their entire marriage, Isidore goes on to scold Harley for the way she spoke to Isabel in court. She tells her ex-husband how she thought he would be more angry at Isabel for not carrying his child. Harley goes on to state how she's even more surprised that Isidore hasn't thanked her for carrying his only child to term. Isidore tells Harley that giving birth to Alan was her duty as a wife. In disbelief, Harley reminds Isidore that her job was to be his wife, not his baby-making machine. She goes on to notice that Isidore isn't angry at Isabel, but brokenhearted since the only woman he ever loved refused to carry his child. Isidore warns Harley that if she ever hurts Isabel the way that she did, then he'll make sure she suffers more than she did when she lost custody of Alan. Ulissa tells her friend, Vanessa Dorval, how thankful she is that Vanessa and her family allowed her to stay the night. She goes on to state how she's unwilling to stay with Isabel after her confession. Even though Vanessa understands her friend's heartache, she tries to tell Ulissa that Devante refuses to own up to his choices, while Isabel expressed regret over hers. She goes on to remind Ulissa that she's the one who can point her family to Jesus, encouraging her not to abandon any of them. Vanessa's father, Jeremiah, enters the living room, telling the girls that they have a visitor. When Jeremiah walks off, they're shocked to see Max Russo after he seemed to have been checked out of rehab. Can't get enough of the crazy world of In Times Like These? Then, treat yourself to a binge watch of In Times Like These. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. You're not ready for what's to come, but tune in anyway.